Good morning and welcome to this live stream from the European Parliament here in Brussels. And we're very well welcome, especially to those who join in us on almost all the social media channels of the Parliament. Today is the International Day against homophobia, biphobia, transphobia and interphobia. We are going to discuss today with my guests the progress made so far in the EU and the current challenges. I'm joined for this discussion by the President of the European Parliament, Roberta Metsola, and two members who co-chair the Parliament group on that monitors the EU LGBTIQ actions, Marc Angel and Terry Reintke. Welcome.
Thank you for the invitation.
If you want to be part of this discussion, you only have to put your comment or questions in the comments section. And I'll put as many as I can to my guest. President Metsola, what, in your opinion, are the most pressing issues today when it comes to LGBTIQ rights in the EU?
Well, I think this Parliament has stood for a very long time in pushing against resistance in a number of countries for progress of equality, and this is the day. Every year I say, I wish we don't have to have a day where we need to remind everyone where we still lag behind. But the European Parliament and the European Union, you can say, is a beacon for where those rights have seen the biggest leap, both in terms of legislative changes, but also in terms of societal changes. We are still very far away, but at least we can very much with colleagues, and it's a real honor for me to be with Thierry and with Marc in order to push a little bit for better equality and recognition and understanding of people's wish to live in the world as they want to live.
Stryber on Instagram is asking, what is the Parliament doing? Can you mention a few legislative actions that the Parliament has taken recently to combat these forms of discrimination?
Well, we can make a distinction between the political actions. So, for example, some ones of symbolism. Today, for the first time, on all our offices across the world, in all the member states, but also here in Strasbourg and in Luxembourg, we are flying the flag on all our buildings. And we have also taken the decision that this will happen automatically every year without a specific decision to be taken. Secondly, we have a number of internal decisions whereby, as an institution, we still need to do much more in order to help rainbow families grow with the children and how they need to receive the same rights as anybody else, irrespective of their marital status or gender status at home. So a lot of work is being done in that regard, and we have very, very good staff organizations, but also members that push for more rights. And then, of course, we are always the first institution to condemn attacks in other countries, but also in member states. And you cannot imagine how often we find ourselves together and say we have the perfect laws on paper, but still people are being attacked in schools, they are being bullied, they are being isolated, and there isn't enough training, education, but also, let's say, pushback against any attempts to sideline or segregate and isolate. And that, I think, is where the European Parliament needs to push much more. And I'm looking forward to the next 2 years, and maybe when we meet again in 1 year's time and look at what the Intergroup, which is a group that brings members together from all political groups, as to where we have arrived and where we still have to go.
Mr. Angel, do we have a reason to celebrate, one more reason to celebrate this year? What progress has been made in combating hate and discrimination against the LGBTIQ community?
We have a reason to celebrate, but we also have a reason to be sad, because there is backlashes in some countries. But today I want to be positive, and I want to say that in the European Parliament we have had 91 resolutions since the beginning of the mandature which were specific LGBTI, or where there was some articles concerning LGBTI people. So we've been very active, and I think that is a reason to celebrate this active European Parliament when it comes in defending LGBTI rights and when it comes to protecting LGBTI rights. We also are very happy that this Commission now has for the first time a Commissioner for Equality, and this is important too. And the Commission President is also very much committed, Mrs. Ursula von der Leyen, for a union of equality. And the Parliament is a strong ally to the Commission in realizing this union of equality. And I think we should celebrate that, but not forget that there is backlashes, not forget that there is hate speech, not forget that there is a strong anti-gender movement who wants to bring us back into patriarchy, who is attacking not only LGBTI rights but also women's rights. And I think therefore we have to be strong and celebrate today.
You mentioned women's rights as well. The intersectional approach to LGBT rights. How important is this? And how important is it to address it also when it comes to legislations and actions?
I think for the European Parliament, and I think inside of the intergroup where we are working across border and also across member state, we now have members from all member states of the European Union. An intersectional approach is very important to us because we see that the attacks that Mark and Roberta were already speaking about are also coming towards different groups and that they're trying to really roll back on rights that have been fought for and that have already been acquired in a lot of ways. So we try to really counter that together and to obviously stand up for LGBTI rights, to mention the strategy, for example, where we are going to push for recognition of parenthood all across the European Union between member states. We are looking forward to adding hate crimes to the list of EU crimes, which I think will be a very important step to safeguard our community. But we also look beyond that, how we can work to fight against racism, how we can work to promote the rights of people with disabilities. And I mean, always, if you talk about these groups, there is an overlap because there are, you know, people from the LGBTI community who are facing racism, people from the LGBTI community who have disabilities, and we are trying to really see that together to have a full picture and then to horizontally fight against all forms of discrimination because we want to live at the end of the day in societies, in the European Union, where everybody can live freely and free from discrimination and free from violence.
And yet we see the numbers. According to this report, this survey is pretty old because it's like almost 3 years old, but still, in 2019, the European Agency, Union Agency for Fundamental Rights found that discrimination on grounds of sexual orientation, gender identity expression, and sex characteristics was actually increasing, 43% compared to 37% in 2012. How do you interpret these figures? How do you, as a politician, see? Do you see that there is a regress in this sense?
I think I would interpret it in that way that yes, there is regression. We see very aggressive and systematic campaigns against the LGBTI community, and I have to mention Poland and Hungary as the two, I think, worst examples, but certainly there are problems in all EU member states. We see that the LGBTI community is being scapegoat for societal problems, and that there is this kind of narrative that we are a threat to society, and I think we have to very firmly stand against that. But I would also say that when we look at, for example, the FRA survey, that we can see that maybe also issues that were already there before are coming more to the surface because we talk about the issues more and also people feel that they can speak about discriminations that they are encountering, that they can report it to the police. And I think that is why it's important to stand firmly against any kind of queerphobia, but at the same time also to really highlight these issues because only when we address them, we can actually raise awareness around them and then change society for the better.
Can I jump in here? Because what Terry says is really important about when you collect data, where it comes from, and how many citizens of the EU, let's focus on the European Union, people who live in our countries, actually report incidents that are committed against them. We have seen an increase in some countries, but in others, because of let's say, societal being led by governments that are allowed to push it down, for example, for reports not to be made in order to disincentivize the possibility for you to say this is not okay, for parents to be able to tell the children, listen, be careful now because this is coming in this country. And if I can look back to countries like mine that joined the European Union with that hope of protection for all rights, for everyone, then what we are also seeing is that countries that once they enter the EU, they think that nobody's going to keep check on them, nobody's going to control what's happening, and you can backslide, as Terry mentioned, in specific countries, and we are seeing this across the board. So what we, I think, have to do as a European Parliament, first of all, is to be not only the promoter, but the reminder that those rights exist, encourage reporting, but also in this building, for example, if something happens, you are going to be protected. And it is not always obvious that that is the case and that is known to be the case.
And you all mentioned discrimination and hate speech, but this sometimes President Metsola is coming from politicians. It does somehow fuel this sort of hate crimes. So what are the dangers of this rhetoric, you think?
Yeah, we see it. We see it everywhere, in this house, in all countries, and that is a very dangerous and increasing, I don't even want to call it phenomenon, but increasing fact. What we have done, however, in this parliament is establish a very, let's say, constructive pro-European center of the house, let's call it that, whereby we can fight against that. Because if we don't, it is so easy to use populist narrative that verges on hatred, to have that hatred pass by because we think it's going to go away if we don't fight, if we try to not to do anything about it. And for many years, we actually looked away or allowed too much to be said when it was unacceptable for it to be said. And if we look at, for example, what has happened, very difficult 2 years because of the COVID pandemic, and we are now seeing an increase of cases because of societies reopening, people meeting together, and therefore attacks increasing. We have seen that coming our way in all cities across the European Union. What we have seen in this house is that where there were attempts to create so-called LGBTIQ-free zones, something I didn't know existed as a word. When I stood up and said, look, you know, for me, this is not something that can be acceptable in the European Union. And we were joined by colleagues from most groups in this house, and it is that constructive core that needs to push back against increase of attacks, speeches, and it is our responsibility, especially as elected representatives, not to let that easy populism take hold, especially when looking in the next 2 years when we are going to start preparing for our elections in 2024. And we all have that responsibility. No one can exonerate himself or herself from it.
You mentioned, yes, rightly so, the infringement procedures, that the hate speech that has been going on in some countries, especially Hungary and Poland, where there were concrete attacks on the LGBTIQ community. What the Commission also launched the infringement procedure. Is this enough, and what else can be done, Mr. Angel, to ensure equal treatment of the LGBTIQ community for people, no matter where they live in the EU?
Well, first of all, it took the Commission a long time to get into infringement procedures for Poland and Hungary, and we and the Parliament we're really pushing that there's also a suivi, that they will that there's a follow-up of that, and they can count on us that we will, because we've been in contact with activists in Poland and Hungary. We've visited Poland and Hungary, and we see the situation there. And these people there, they believe in Europe, they believe in our values, they believe in the European Union, so we cannot disappoint them. So really, I hope that these infringement procedures will come to a positive end Voilà, but I just wanted to come back to what Roberta said before. This Parliament, we have so many allies. This resolution, when we declared the European Union as an LGBTI freedom zone, was voted by 498 members of this Parliament out of 705. And that made me proud. As a gay man, it made me proud that we have allies, that my rights are respected by my colleagues. And this is, I think, was a very strong message also to our friends in Poland and in Hungary, that they know there is a strong group in Brussels. The European Parliament stands for your rights.
Here in the EU, we pride ourselves when it comes to anti-discrimination laws against the LGBTIQ community. But as member states have different legislations when it comes to free movement of families, for example, it is often difficult for these rainbow families to move from one country to another and exercise their treaty rights, for instance. I mentioned here the case of Bulgaria. There was an ECJ ruling on that. What can we do to defend the free rights of movement, or their treaty rights, actually, for couples, for rainbow couples who find themselves in difficulties, and sometimes their children risk becoming stateless?
Can I first start by saying you're right that the European Union has come a long way in terms of anti-discrimination policies, and especially coming from a conservative member state like Germany. Germany wouldn't be where it is today fighting discrimination if it wasn't for the European Union. I think that has to be said. But at the same time, we also have the Horizontal Equality Directive that has been blocked now for many, many years in Council, which would actually be the next step in really providing protection from discrimination on all grounds of discrimination in all sectors of our society. So to really fulfill that promise of the European Union to protect people from discrimination, we really urgently need to add that to the list of policies that we have. But you're absolutely right, we have a very specific challenge for rainbow families. And I mentioned already in the strategy, there is a very positive proposal that the member states are supposed to recognize parenthood. So, for example, birth certificates, adoption certificates between each other, so that we don't create a situation where a family just exercising their right to freedom of movement moves from, I don't know, Finland to Poland and then maybe loses their legal status towards each other. So we really want to make sure that this changes. But if I may add, the intergroup in the European Parliament would also like to extend this not only to parenthood, but also to partnership, because we believe obviously there is a very specific protection needed for children, but we also don't want, for example, couples who are married in one member state to move somewhere and then not be married anymore in that other member state. So I think that there is still a lot of work to do to make sure that all people in the European Union, including rainbow families, can really fully exercise their right to freedom of movement as EU citizens.
If I could come in
Yes,
here, please. The petition committee of this parliament has been very active on the free movement of rainbow families. And we have this fantastic European Parliament research service, which made a fantastic research document of about 100 pages on the barriers to free movement of rainbow families. So, and then we voted a resolution, again, which had a good majority here, where we asked for this directive, and the Commission has promised it. So the Parliament is really also defending the rainbow families.
I can maybe draw parallels with what happened over 10 years ago in not a similar, but on the way. I remember one of the very first report I had to shadow in this house was Ulrike Lunacek's report in 2013, which was a roadmap against homophobia. It was difficult to get that through with the majorities that we wanted to have. And if you compare the wording, how much, let's say, less ambitious it was, because that was the maximum that the Parliament could achieve, which led to then the Commission coming back, as Mark mentioned earlier, you know, with the current program, with a commissioner dedicated to equality, and Helena works very well and very much in that regard. But if I also look back from a legal perspective, so I talk as a lawyer now, we have been struggling in the European Parliament, for example, and we did that for years, to recognize divorce judgments from one country to another. Yeah. That took almost 10 years to achieve. Maintenance, in other words, when you divorce, who pays for children? Which of the spouses would pay for the children if they move country? And that is fundamentally what we have said as EU member states, that what a judge in Luxembourg gives as a decision, a judge in Malta needs to execute. Doesn't always happen, and that is not possible. As you mentioned, it's not a treaty right, but it's a regulation right. In other words, there are regulations that oblige member states to do that. And if you think about who is suffering, you have people who simply want to have their union recognized from one country to another, to have access to social services, to health, to education, to, as we have seen in a pandemic, we had a lot of cases of families that got stuck in countries where their rights and their status was not recognized. We are in 2022. I think we can really finally say that if there is one country in the European Union. We share the values, we push for that, same principles, same fundamental rights. They have to be recognized elsewhere and enforced, more importantly, because also, as Terry said, it's not always about the children who have a right to the family life that they enjoy in the country where they were born or where they are being brought up, but also with people who have chosen a union that is recognized and legalized in one country that has to be recognized by another. No excuses. It's not possible to accept that.
And one of the Commission's LGBT equality strategy, one of the main pillars is the EU's role in the world and the promotion of human rights. In your opinion, do you think safeguarding the human rights and LGBT rights in particular should be at the heart of EU's external policy?
This is something that is at the core of our external policy, and in fact, I spend a lot of my time meeting with representatives from countries outside the European Union, where, of course, the recognition and the rights and the protection is far behind what the European Union has done. And in fact, that is why it is so important when we talk about the European Union as being a safe shelter for persons who are escaping persecution in member states because of their sexual orientation. This afternoon, in fact, I will have a meeting with a Ugandan LGBTIQ activist who is going to send that message that the European Union needs to continue to be that beacon of the world that protects and shelters.
That's why also we push in our trade policy, in our trade policy for very strong human rights chapters. And even now we are working on a modernization of a trade agreement with Chile, where we have even a gender chapter in it. And I think that's the future, to also put that in our trade policy, because we cannot tolerate that there is countries where LGBTI people are persecuted, even that there is still countries where there's a death sentence for same-sex relations.
And can I add that especially...
May I just add that you have been very vocal also when it comes to non-EU countries like Turkey and other Balkan countries. Is it also important to make sure that these rules, the rights and fundamental rights of people are safeguarded when it comes to also dealing and negotiating with potential candidate countries to the EU?
Absolutely. I think that the safeguarding of fundamental rights, rule of law, democracy has to be a priority also in accession negotiations. And I think that we have come a long way there as well, because I think it didn't used to be a priority as it is now, because I feel that now when we speak, for example, about the accession of countries from the Western Balkans, when we speak about our relationship with Turkey, this has become much more of a topic that is being discussed. I still think we can, listen even more to the activists on the ground, specifically because in the intergroup we are always working. Obviously, we do parliamentary work, but what is also important for us is really to include the community in every single decision that is taken, because at the end of the day, the people from the LGBTI community know best what they need. So I think that there we can even do better, especially when we talk about accession. But if I can just add the thought, and I think that this is also true for accession, the Western Balkans, Turkey, now Ukraine. When we look at the world, we see that this struggle between democratic societies and autocracy, authoritarian rule regimes, that this is really sort of fueling, especially now with the war in Ukraine, where Russia, an autocratic state, has attacked a democracy. And I think that when we talk about what makes democracies, what is kind of the core of democracies, it is also, next to obviously having democratic elections, having a system based on rule of law, it is also the safeguarding of fundamental rights for all people in society. So I think especially in this sort of world situation that we are in right now, Roberta spoke about the EU being a safe haven for LGBTI people, but I also think a beacon of hope that we live in societies where this struggle for fundamental rights, for democracy, for rule of law is working, where we are moving forward, where we make progress. I think a lot of people in the world look at the European Union and say it's working there, and this also gives us hope that we can move forward with this. So I think that this makes our work inside of the European Union, but also outside in the external relation regarding LGBTI rights even more important.
Thank you. Ms. Angel, we have a question from Instagram from Sam, who says, has the EU made any progress in combating hate and discrimination against LGBTIQ community? And how can we educate? How can the EU help to educate people on LGBTIQ issues to make this our societies more inclusive?
Well, progress, certainly we have done it. We've talked about the progress. And when it comes to education, I think and this is something we as a parliament also defended in many resolutions. It's very important that in schools, in all the member states, we have comprehensive sexual and relationship education, not only sexual education in the way how to not become pregnant or to become pregnant, but the whole relationship around it. And comprehensive sexual education means also talking about trans identity, about gender identity, about intersex people. So to informing is very important. And from every age, this education has to be age adapted. And this makes young people also much more resilient against attacks. It helps building up prejudice. And I think this is very important that it starts in school very early, educating that LGBTI rights are human rights, women's rights are human rights, and not tolerate that some political leaders with hate speech try to divide the societies, but bring societies together. You know, fighting for LGBTI rights, it's not that we're fighting for extra rights. It's just fighting for non-discrimination, fighting to have the same rights as every other rights and obligations as any other EU citizens. That's what is the fight for LGBTI rights.
How important is it to have representation, not only in politics, but also in art, media, and etc., in institutions? How important is it so that we can give a message to young people out there that it is possible, that their freedoms are safeguarded?
Representation in terms of activism or
representation in terms of having LGBTIQ politicians who are more active in politics, but also not only, also in other areas.
I have met so many politicians from my country and in other countries who are part of the LGBTI community who tell you, I can't say. I can't say because I would not get elected, or I can't say because I will be only identified with that as that. And that has made me think quite a lot in terms of how we balance between the fights that you fight and how you are, as Terry said, the beacon of hope, because we can do it because we have seen how what we say, what we do, what we decide in terms of laws that we adopt, it actually makes a difference in people's lives. I have 4 boys. I would like that all the teachers that teach my children actually tell them and educate them and so that they are, let's say, aware of what they need or how they need to be or how to, but to be honest, when I had this conversation with them, it's almost like, well, of course, these are obvious. These are obvious, like, why are you even asking us this? And perhaps we have to, and I have to learn that when compared to when I went to school and we had to learn certain things for our children growing up today, but again, in European schools where the discussion is there, it's present and it's even, let's say, not a concern because it's taken for granted in terms of openness, in terms of not even bringing it into the conversation. So I think it's a little bit of both, that we need to make sure that you have the protection, you have the awareness, you have the education and the training for the, let's say, the societies that are growing up, not to have to ask the questions or wonder whether they need to fight for something more. Is that enough? Of course not. And as we heard earlier, I mean, we have regression, we have backsliding, but we can also celebrate the fact that for younger generations, this is something that they expect from their politicians, they expect from their teachers, from their activists, in order to say, look, yes, this is something that we can all agree on. Far away, but I think we can manage.
Terry Renke, you are very engaged in activism on LGBTIQ issues. You identify as a member of the community. How important is this to you? And how do you see this progress as politician? Does this help you in your politics?
She's the best, huh? She's the best, to be clear.
No, but you know, when Roberta was talking about this, like, I used to be in a secret relationship because my partner did not want to come out. That was a very, very difficult experience for me. And then when I started to be in a relationship with my wonderful girlfriend, we talked about it, and I think we also jointly and very deliberately agreed that we want to be visual, that we want to be visible in society with who we are, that we are in a lesbian relationship with each other. Because I think that at the end of the day, when then you have people who are so obviously part of the community, it also becomes something that is much more just accepted, that people don't even think about or talk about or make an issue about so much anymore. So I felt that this was something that would help to just speak about it, to make people see that this is a completely normal way of having a family life. And I still hope, I know that yesterday, I think second league football player came, a 17-year-old second league football player came out in the UK, which I only have a lot of admiration for, because I think especially for male football players, it is still a very big challenge to overcome. And I think we have to show this admiration, we have to show the support, because this really takes courage. And then I hope that not only in politics, but as you say, in arts, in academia, in sports, everywhere, because LGBTI people are everywhere. We are part of this society, and that's why I also think that we should be visible everywhere where we are. And yeah, in politics, in sports, and wherever it's needed. And I hope with that, actually then, maybe in a couple of years, we don't even have to talk about it so much anymore. We don't need an IDAHOBIT specifically anymore, because it's just so accepted in society that we can raise our rainbow flags every day.
Yes, now we have an...
I'm very confident that they will arrive, because young people are so open, for them it's not a problem. And coming out, maybe in a few years, nobody has to come out. Just live your life, Do you know
that was going to be my question. For how long do we still need to do this?
Well, I hope not for that long, because I'm very confident in the youth. And now with the conference in the future of Europe, I met so many young people, and this parliament engaged in bringing so many young people together. And when I address the subject of LGBTI rights, it's such a normality for them. And as I said, I hope that in a few years, nobody has to come out. You just live your life. Do you know any straight teenager, 16, going to his parents and telling, or her parents and telling, hey, mommy, I have to tell you something, I'm heterosexual, or and this would be the ideal, that just live your life. Exactly. You have a boyfriend, and people say, okay, he's gay. You have a girlfriend as a woman, lesbian. If you're trans, non-binary, just live your life. And then I'm sure that in decades to come, if we fight this anti-gender movement and we push them back, then this will happen, and people can live the way they want without being discriminated. That's what we are fighting for.
Yes.
Absolutely. We're reaching the end of this discussion, but I want a short message from all of you regarding Ukraine. The war in Ukraine has driven so many women, especially and LGBTIQ people across the border, especially trans women and men, to Hungary, Poland, and other EU countries whose identity may not be recognized in these countries. So what, in your view, should member states, EU states, do to protect their rights?
Well, for me, I think that we should be quite concerned about what we are hearing about reports of trafficking of women in many countries, Ukrainian women and girls. So this is something that we are pushing now, also the Commission to look at the legislation and see whether that can be a specific framework of protection. We see it every time there is an influx of members from a third country. We saw it in 2015. With the influx from Syria, and we are seeing it again now. I think our message has to be consistent. Europe has opened its heart and its homes for Ukrainian elderly people, persons with a disability, women and children. I saw them myself when I went there, and I think the rights that they are afforded should be the same like every other citizen of the European Union, and everyone else living in the European Union should be afforded. And that means that if we need to protect them and call out where discrimination is taking place, we should do it no matter where that happens.
And again, our fantastic European Parliament Research Service has done a study on the effects of LGBTI people, the consequences of the Ukraine war. And there's a few problems First of all, we know that trans women with male gender marker in their passports, they're not allowed to leave Ukraine. That's already a huge problem. And those who can leave, there is problems with hormonal treatments. We have to ensure that they have access to health, and some countries do not provide them this hormonal treatment. So here civil society, ILGA Europe was very active in doing this, but this is something we have to ensure. We also know that Ukraine is the country with one of the highest HIV prevalence in the European Union.
And they're not getting treatment.
And I've been an activist an ambassador for UNAIDS, and I know how important it is.
Yeah.
And we have to support also Ukraine to send treatments, because there have been supply chain disruptions. So we have to support the people who stayed in the Ukraine, but also those who managed to flee, that they get their treatments, be it HIV treatment for those who are infected with HIV, be it for trans persons who are in transition, or intersex person who need hormones. And it's very important to ensure that. And that's something I'm very happy that the activists, ILGA Europe and others are really active on it.
Can I just,
please?
because I completely agree with everything that you said, and I think specifically also now looking at the large number of refugees coming from Ukraine, but maybe it's also a good reminder that in general the EU's refugees policy needs very, very urgent reform, because we were speaking a lot about fundamental rights, and the fundamental rights of a lot of refugees trying to find shelter inside of the European Union at the external borders are really being, we say in German, kicked with the foot. So we really need to work on this, and I hope that now, with the situation that we have, with the great challenge that we have, that maybe there is also going to be movement. We know that certain member states have blocked progress in this field. We really urgently need to work on what we have, and I hope that with this situation now we can actually bring some dynamic into this discussion.
In one very short question, your message to the LGBTIQ community out there?
Be who you are, love who you love, be proud of all your colors, and we are going to support you.
We, as a European Parliament, are here to be your beacon of hope, and we will not let you down.
You're welcome in the European Union.
Thank you very much for this discussion. I really appreciate it and enjoyed it. I will finish this live stream with a comment from one of our viewers from YouTube, Cosmane, if I'm not wrong. No one should be disadvantaged because of their gender. All people are equal, and everyone should be given the same chance. Thank you very much for following this discussion, and see you soon in future live streamings.